So I'll be talking about 3 drugs that I'm working on. 2 of them I've already talked about, but the third is something new. So I'll just do a brief introduction of what we're trying to do in this group. And again, the overall goal is to do more efficient reactions. So instead of doing one reaction, do a workup purification, second reaction, and again until you get your final product. We're looking for some system in which you can put all the reagents in, either into one flask, or I'll go over microreactors in a second, have all these reactions take place all at once in one flask, and then come out and separate your final product at the end. So this way you can skip the isolation steps between reaction 1 and 2, and between 2 and 3, and just isolate your final product. So the first way we're trying to do this is to encapsulate catalysts, since a lot of the incompatibility with multiple steps in one pot comes from catalyst incompatibility. So the way that we're trying to do this is to have a polymeric catalyst, so a large catalyst that's encapsulated by a polymer shell. And we want this shell to have pores that are small enough that the large polymeric catalyst can't get out, but still large enough so that the small molecule reagents and products can diffuse in and out. So you can have your first reagent diffuse into one capsule, be transformed into that product, have that product diffuse out, and then into a new capsule, and so on until you get your final product. So then, again, at the end, you only have your final product to isolate. The second thing that we're looking at is something I haven't talked about in a while, but it's microreactors. And this kind of started in our group when Jeremy and Elizabeth worked on simplified microfluidic devices. I did a little bit of work making solids in flow, and now Drew's doing a lot of work with solid supported catalysts that you can pack into this tubing. So what you have is, one reagent flowing down, maybe add a second reagent to make a product, and a third reagent to make a second product, and so on. And Stephen Lay has been doing a lot of work in this area and has synthesized total products just completely in flow. So that's a second way that we're trying to do multi-steps in one flask, or just reaction vessel, the vessel being the tubing in this case. The first drug that I'm going to talk about today is pregabalin, and it's a GABA-amino acid, and you've all heard about it. And hopefully this is the last time for a while at least that I'll be showing you this scheme. It starts with the tandem catalysis of doing a Henry type reaction to make nitroalkene, and as you know, this nitroalkene can be transformed into the dinitro product by a second addition of nitromethane, or if you add a second catalyst and a second reagent, you can actually direct it down to this one product, and that can be done at 80 to 90% yield. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the steps beyond this right now, but in the last 3 months since I've given a group meeting last time, I've worked on the scope and I've worked on kind of the mechanistic details of this reaction. So that's what I'm going to talk about. All right, so this one. Okay, so the first thing I did was just to look at the catalyst, the microencapsulated catalyst for this nitroalkene forming reaction. So if you just take the first step and do it, not in the presence of the nickel catalyst and the malonate, you end up with the product you want plus this dinitro product, which comes from the second addition of nitromethane. And I was really just looking at what factors are important for the catalyst. So there are typically solvent effects when you do any reaction, but in our case there are also swelling effects too. There are some solvents that will swell the microcaps, and there are some that won't. There are some that will partially swell. So I did this reaction in ethanol, chloroform, and acetone, which are all swelling solvents, toluene ether, and THF, which are non-swelling solvents, and then a mixture of a swelling solvent and a non-swelling solvent in 1:3 ratio. So this first category of swelling solvents, you can see that with free PEI, which are the white balls, or white bars, so the free PEI as a catalyst, works really well in ethanol. And it works, you get a 60% yield in chloroform, and it works the least well in acetone. So this free PEI is really showing what is a good solvent for the reaction. And we're not looking at swelling effects here, obviously, because we don't have microcaps. And then when you look and compare it to the encapsulated PEI case, you can see that the trends are the same. The loading of the encapsulated PEI is actually about half of the free PEI. Plus you have the kinetic barrier of the shell. So we're expecting a slower slower reaction. So this is after 6 hours actually. But the trends are the same. Like the yield or the conversion of benzaldehyde is the highest in ethanol. It's moderate in chloroform, and it's the worst in acetone. In the other case of non-swelling solvents, you can see that there are still good solvents for the reaction if you use PEI. So toluene is actually almost as good a solvent as ethanol is. Ether is okay, and THF is not very good. But if you look at the encapsulated PEI, you can see that all of these reactions are under 100% conversion. So even though you have a good solvent for the reaction, if it doesn't swell the caps, the reaction's not going to work well. Plus, and if you have a solvent that does swell the caps, but it's not a good solvent for the reaction, you're also not going to get much of a reaction. Yeah.
What is the reaction time?
This is 6 hours. If you go up to 24 hours, the conversion with free PEI is all all 100%. I just took it somewhere in the middle so you can look at the different rate effects. And so we do know from this case that swelling is important, and then of course solvent identity itself is also important. And it's also kind of interesting, and this is what we've seen before, but I never really analyzed very hard. But if you swell it, or you have a mixture of a swelling solvent and a non-swelling solvent, you retain most of the activity between free PEI and encapsulated PEI. Drew?
Don't choose methanol.
Yeah, but methanol and ethanol have the same activity, and this is just, separate from the actual one-part reaction. I was just looking at swelling in general, not swelling derivatives. Methanol and ethanol actually both give very similar conversion times. I just had both sets of data for